What I generally look for in a guitar tone is, does it feel right? That is the main sort of criteria for me. The tone itself, I know that I can, play around with some controls, but if it doesn't feel right, then it's not very fun to play. And I've had this love-hate relationship with a 5150, funnily enough, in that they always felt too slow, like they reacted not fast enough for me, like it wasn't immediate. So for years, I just cancelled it off, and then I'd see another person playing a 5150, and I'd be like, it sounds absolutely incredible. Why don't I like it? Maybe there's something wrong with me. And the same goes for any amp. I'll feel that same way about, you've got all the amps here, the 5150 being, just right there. I sort of learned to love it. I learned how to approach that amp. So what I'm looking for mainly in a guitar tone, does it feel good? Secondary, does it sound good? Not the other way around, because I want to have fun while I'm playing it. I guess the uniqueness of my guitar tone comes with just how dry I like my distortion. Often in the metal genre, it's very saturated, very high gain. I mean, if you look at, let's just say John Petrucci, when he's shredding, his gain's on 10 on a JP2C, and I look at that and my brain melts because I don't know how to control that. So when it comes to me, I like a really dry tone, and I dig in to get my saturation. And it's something that I guess I learned quite early on, being that the less gain I have, the more clarity I get, which, makes a lot of sense because the signal isn't being squashed by this wall of filthy, let's be honest, white noise. So I hear people playing through my rig and it doesn't sound the same. They always need to turn up the gain to get more of that saturation out of it, unless of course they're also a very heavy picker. But generally, it would be that, and focusing on the higher mids of the guitar tone as opposed to the lower mids. And what I mean by that is I like the sort of top end snarl of the mid-range as opposed to the low end woof. Yes, you get more of the sort of note with the lower side of the mid-range, but I feel like the bass kind of takes over that. So I'm really heavily focused on a guitar tone that just rips your face off and cuts in the top mids, which I think is, a complete opposite of someone like Periphery, where they focus on the low mids, whereas I focus on the higher mids. The most valuable thing I ever learned was not to compare what I'm doing with others, directly anyway. I mean, I think that we all go on Instagram as guitar players and think, damn, that person is way better than me. I'm never going to get to that level. And I think that healthy competition is obviously always a good thing, but when you are dictating your output based on what someone else is doing, I think it becomes counterproductive. So instead of seeing that person as a negative, see it as a positive. It's like, that person is amazing at guitar. What can I learn from what this person is doing, and turn it around, instead of seeing the glass half empty, see it vice versa. And I think that was probably one of the most valuable sort of lessons I learned, was that instead of seeing it as a negative, try and turn it into a positive and learn from it rather than make it hinder any progress that you can make. So my writing process generally starts as a really small segment of an idea. And I've spoken about this multiple times over many videos over the years, but the use of motifs, and the way that I sort of envision a motif is like a really short riff, being that it can be repeated over and over, it can repeat it in many different ways. But once you have multiple of these little segments, you can start trying to piece them together like a puzzle. And I think that makes this style of music more digestible, and it makes my output be tenfold what it was. Instead of me just writing a part that maybe doesn't relate to another part, I have like this library of different motifs that I can use within a song. So instead of having to write a part and I think I have no idea where this can go next. I already have a bunch of parts that I can sort of play around with and sort of express myself that way. So instead of just playing my motif how it was, maybe I'll take some of the notes out. Maybe I'll play it backwards. Maybe I'll try it in a different octave or in a different position of my scale. So that's kind of how I approach songwriting, and how I guess I constantly just can keep writing more stuff. The good thing about motifs is even if that's a formula that you're following, all motifs can sound very, very different. So even though you're using this as like a baseline to what you want to do, every idea is going to sound different if your motif is different. So my most used guitar now, I was endorsed by Mayonnaise Guitars in Poland for a very long time. I had a multitude of signature guitars from them, and they are quite simply amazing. So as far as most played guitar model, it's probably my Mayonnaise Devel Catzy prototype number 1, which is the Adinia Burst, which was the purple burst guitar, which many of you have probably seen over the years if you're familiar with the band. And recently I moved on to Schecter, who make amazing guitars as well. So the most used guitar over the years is probably the Mayonnaise, as well as, I've had an Ibanez 1077 XL RG, the 7680 Limited 1 RG, which was a firm favorite of mine as well. And anyone that knows the 7680 will know the rareness of that guitar. I had the purple finish one rather than the blue finish. And each of them are special in their own unique ways. So that's probably 4 of my favorite guitars over the years. And then as far as amps goes, I'd say my most used amp in a live situation is a dual rectifier by Mesa Boogie. I absolutely love that amp. And I've loved it because I grew up in like the 2000s era. So all the bands at the time were using PRS guitars with Mesa Boogie dual rectifiers. That's the sound of my childhood. Everything from Limp Bizkit to everyone else that used it around that time period. Any nu metal band, almost even any emo band or, something like that. So that is still to this day one of the most pleasant sounding amps to my ears when I'm standing in front of it. It just screams power and it hurts in the best possible way. Other amps that I've used over the years. Hughes & Kettner Triamp Mark III, great amp. Probably one of the most underrated brands on the planet. Hughes & Kettner isn't really seen in this genre of music, but it sounds perfect for the style of music that I do. Marshall gets a good shout out as well with, I've got an 8100, the amp from, Chuck from Death. Meshuggah used to use it in the early period too. That gets a good shout out because it's such a strange choice of amp, because it was a cheap amp in comparison to the all tube amps that we all know and love. And, just modern amps that I've recently gravitated towards is the Red 7 Leviathan, which is another great amp. It's got that dual rectifier mixed with a Bogner Uberschall kind of sound. So that's a really, really good amp as well. Pretty much everything on this wall rules, which is why it's here, Like I found the amps that I really like, and this is a selection of the ones that I've decided to keep over the years. My favorite cab in the world is a Mesa Boogie oversized 4x12. It just sounds menacing. Shout out to Zilla as well, because Zilla makes some great cabs as well. And I've got a 2x12 that I recorded the last album with, a V30 and a Heritage Creamback in it, and it sounded really, really good. So favorite 4x12 is the Mesa Boogie rectifier. Favorite 2x12 is the Zilla Fat Boy, which some of you have seen because I've used that live as well. And a third shout out to Coffee Custom Cabs as well. I have a Latte 2x12 that also sounds amazing, that I've also used for recording before. So my expansion pack with STL tones, there's a range of very, very different sounds. So there's a bunch of really great rhythm presets from, 5150, Triamp, the Victory Kraken, the Victory Superjack. But on top of that, we've also got like a HM2 set to full, going through a Hughes & Kettner Pure Tone, which is one of the biggest sounding amps that I have in my collection. And the HM2 makes a really good extra layer that I did on Instasis, actually with a bass, funnily enough, to have the octave lower for the end of Labos, just as an example. And so I've thought about, like, where can you blend all of these amps in a performance to sort of make the biggest guitar sound possible. And there's quite a few amps here that I've not really seen anyone use on any expansion pack or any, tone pack when it comes to modeling amps. Like, I've never seen a Hughes & Kettner Warp X, which is a really underrated amp, one of my favorites. The Hughes & Kettner Pure Tone, again, a really great sounding clean guitar amp that hasn't really been explored by very many people. And then we have stuff like the Red 7 Leviathan, which is quite a rare and unique amp. Same with the Driftwood Purple Nightmare. Obviously, it's available with the Lassie Lama pack, but this is my take on that amp, another really unique amp that sounds great. So here you're going to get loads of different sounds by some very unique amplifiers that maybe you've not heard of before, to explore to your heart's content for as many different layers of guitar as you want. I think that people will like this expansion pack because it's a different take on what is usual with rhythm guitar in the metal world. It's extremely low gain, and you really have to dig in hard in order to get the full potential of these sounds out, which is, normally the opposite, where you're trying to control the sound. This time you've got the opposite problem where you're trying to hit harder to make the sound. So it's a different perspective, and obviously you can turn up the gain if you want to, but give these patches a try and see if it makes you a better guitar player in the process. And just to add, if you want great rhythm sounds for 6-string, 7-string, and 8-string, with potential overlays with HM2s and many other amazing pedals that are right there in my cabinet, then make sure you grab my expansion pack for ToneHub, because it is, personally, my favorite rhythm sounds in the digital world.